If you think your vegetable garden is winding down for the year, you're about to make the same mistake that almost every gardener makes in July. Right now, while you're looking out at your tomatoes and thinking, well, that's the season, this is as good as it gets, there's a second harvest sitting right in front of you. And most people let it slip through their fingers without ever realizing it was there. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly which 15 vegetables you can still plant this month, why the calendar in your head has been lying to you, and how to turn the back half of your growing year into the most productive stretch you've had all season. Here's what almost every gardener does in July. They treat it like cleanup season. They pull the spent pea vines, they put the seed packets away, and somewhere in the back of their mind, they start checking out, telling themselves they'll start fresh next spring. And honestly, garden centers don't help. Walk into one in mid-July, and half of them have already cleared their seed racks to make room for patio furniture and end-of-summer sales. That sends a quiet but powerful signal, whether it's true or not. The planting window is closed. So people stop. They let their garden coast toward autumn, on whatever momentum it has left, and without meaning to, they leave weeks, sometimes months, of usable growing time, sitting completely empty. But here's the thing, that belief is just wrong, and the science backs me up on this. July isn't the end of the planting season. For a huge number of crops, it's actually the start of the best planting season of the whole year. A lot of vegetables don't just tolerate the heat and the shortening days of late summer, they're practically built for it. Cool season crops like lettuce, spinach, and broccoli grow sweeter and far less bitter when they mature in the cooler, shorter days of fall instead of fighting through the brutal heat of midsummer. And fast-maturing crops planted now will hit their harvest right as your tomatoes and squash start fading, which means your garden's output doesn't decline in September, it actually gets a second wind. So that whole "the growing season is over" mindset isn't based on plant biology at all. It's based on garden center merchandising and habit. Once you know your average first frost date, planting in July isn't risky. It's strategic. And if you plant the right crops over the next 2 or 3 weeks, you'll be harvesting fresh vegetables well into October, and in a lot of climates, right through the first frosts and beyond. That's not an exaggeration, that's a documented, repeatable result, and I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this list. Because before we're done, I'm also going to tell you which one of these 15 vegetables has the narrowest planting window of the entire year. Miss it by even a week, and you've genuinely lost your shot until next July. And near the end of this video, I'll show you one simple trick that decides whether your July-planted seeds actually germinate in this heat, or quietly cook in the soil and never come up at all. Most people skip this step entirely, and it's the single biggest reason their second-season garden fails before it even gets started. So stay with me, because that part matters just as much as the list itself. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with bush beans. Most gardeners assume beans are a one-shot, spring-only crop. It happens because people plant them once back in May and then more or less forget beans exist. But bush beans mature in just 50 to 55 days, which puts harvest comfortably before frost in most regions. Heat doesn't bother them much during germination, and once the worst of the summer heat starts to ease, they actually set pods better than before. So just sow the seeds about an inch deep, keep the watering consistent for the first couple of weeks, and you'll have a full second crop of fresh beans in early fall, right when your spring planting has already stopped producing. Next, carrots. People assume carrots need the cool soil of spring to get going, mostly because spring carrots are so common that it feels like the only window that exists. But carrots planted in July mature during the cooling days of September and October, and that's actually when they taste their best. Cold weather triggers carrots to convert their starches into sugar as a kind of self-protection, a process called cold-induced sweetening. So sow the seeds about a 1/4 inch deep, keep the soil consistently moist until they germinate, because carrots are slow and genuinely unforgiving if the soil dries out, and you'll end up with some of the sweetest, crispest carrots you'll grow all year. Then there's beets, which most people overlook entirely once spring has passed. They tend to get lumped in with carrots as a cool spring-only crop, but a July sowing gives you tender fall beets in just 50 to 60 days. Like carrots, beets store up sugar as protection against the cold, which intensifies their flavor. Soak the seeds for a few hours before planting to soften that hard seed coat and speed up germination, and you'll get a continuous harvest of both roots and greens. Broccoli is another one people give up on too early. Spring broccoli often bolts or turns bitter in the season's first real heat, and gardeners read that as the crop failing, so they assume it's done for the year. But broccoli actually performs better as a fall crop because it matures into cool weather instead of bolting straight into hot weather. Brassicas like this form tighter, more flavorful heads when they mature alongside falling temperatures and shortening days. Start with transplants rather than seed, so they get a head start before fall slows everything down, and you'll end up with large, tight, bitterness-free heads in October. Cabbage runs into the same mistaken belief. People see its long 70 to 100-day maturation time and assume it's too risky to start in summer. But planted now, it matures right on schedule, well before your first hard frost, and cabbage shrugs frost off easily. Its leaves contain compounds that let it tolerate a light frost without any damage, and that cold exposure actually improves the flavor. Use transplants, give them plenty of space, mulch heavily to keep the root zone cool, and you'll often end up with frost-sweetened cabbage that outperforms anything you grew in spring. Cauliflower has a reputation for being finicky and spring-only, mostly because it's notoriously prone to something called buttoning, where heat stress causes it to form tiny, useless heads instead of one good one. A fall-maturing cauliflower avoids that heat stress completely, because buttoning is triggered by temperature swings during head formation, and fall's steadier, cooling weather prevents that from happening. Transplant now, and once the heads start forming, tie the outer leaves over them to keep them white and protected. The result is clean, full-sized heads without any of the usual spring guesswork. Then there's kale, which people assume is finished once summer heat sets in. And it's true that kale does sulk and turn bitter in peak heat, which is exactly why gardeners write it off too soon. But a July planting matures right into the cool season, which is genuinely when kale performs at its best. Like the other brassicas, its sugars concentrate as temperatures drop, and it can survive well below freezing. Direct sow or transplant now, and don't be afraid to keep harvesting right through your first few frosts, because what you'll get is kale that actually tastes good, sweet and tender, instead of tough and bitter. Collard greens face a similar problem, mostly because most planting guides only ever mention them in spring lists, so people assume that's their only season. In reality, collards are remarkably frost-tolerant, and just like kale, they improve with cold exposure, because frost breaks down starches into sugar right in the leaves. Direct sow now for a steady harvest of cut-and-come-again leaves through fall, and you've got one of the lowest maintenance greens in the garden, one that genuinely gets better the colder it gets. Swiss chard is one a lot of gardeners think they've already used up, assuming their spring planting was their only shot. But chard tolerates both heat during germination and cold during maturity, which gives it one of the widest planting windows of any vegetable you can grow. A July sowing extends your harvest dramatically, often into early winter if you give it a little protection. Succession sow every 2 to 3 weeks, and you'll have colorful, nutrient-dense greens coming in almost year-round. Lettuce gets written off the moment people watch their spring crop bolt and turn bitter in early heat, but that bolting is triggered by heat and long daylight hours, and lettuce sown in late July, time to mature as temperatures drop, sidesteps that trigger almost entirely. Choose a heat-tolerant variety for germination, or start the seeds indoors somewhere cooler before transplanting out, and you'll get crisp, non-bitter lettuce all through fall without a single bolted plant. Spinach has the same problem, maybe even more so, since it bolts almost the moment real summer heat arrives, which reinforces the idea that it's simply done for the year. But sown in late July for a fall harvest, spinach avoids that trigger completely, and it's genuinely one of the most cold-hardy vegetables you can grow, with its sugar content actually rising as temperatures fall. Sow the seeds slightly deeper than usual, keep the soil cool and moist while they germinate, and what you'll get is tender, sweet spinach with none of that spring bitterness. Radishes tend to get dismissed as a quick spring snack and nothing more, mostly because their 25 to 30-day maturity makes people think of them as a single early-season novelty. But that same speed is exactly what makes them one of the easiest, lowest-risk plantings you can make in July. Direct sow them in succession every 10 days or so, and they'll keep your garden producing something while your slower fall crops are still catching up. Turnips are probably the most overlooked vegetable on this entire list, mostly because they've got an image problem, seen as old-fashioned or strictly a root-cellar crop. But planted in July, turnips mature quickly, and both the roots and the greens are harvestable, which makes them one of the most efficient plants you can grow. Cold exposure sweetens the roots the same way it does carrots and beets. Just thin the seedlings early so the roots have room to bulb up properly, and you'll get 2 harvests, greens now and roots later, from a single planting. Bush cucumbers are another crop people assume is finished, since cucumbers feel like an early summer thing, and a second round can seem redundant. But a July-planted cucumber matures in 50 to 60 days, giving you a fresh crop right as your spring vines start losing vigor and getting more prone to disease, which is just a natural part of how cucumber plants age. Choose a compact bush variety for faster, more controlled growth, direct sow in full sun, and you'll have crisp, disease-free cucumbers coming in right as your first batch fades out. And finally, winter squash, which is the one almost everyone gets wrong, and it's got the tightest window on this entire list. The mistake people make is assuming that anything planted in summer counts as a summer crop, without realizing winter squash needs a long runway to mature. Varieties like butternut and acorn need somewhere around 80 to 100 days, which means early July is often your absolute last realistic planting date before frost cuts the season short. These squash need to fully mature and cure on the vine before frost hits, because an immature fruit won't store properly and won't develop its full flavor or sweetness. So count backward from your average first frost date, right now, today, and if you're still inside that window, get the seeds in the ground this week. Do that, and you'll have a full harvest of storage squash that keeps you fed well into winter. Miss it, and there's no second chance until next year. Now, here's that trick I promised you earlier. The number one reason July-planted seeds fail isn't bad soil or poor seed quality, it's heat-killing germination before it ever gets the chance to start. A lot of cool season seeds, things like lettuce and spinach, can actually go dormant or rot in soil once it climbs above roughly 80 degrees. The fix is simple. Water the planting area thoroughly the night before you sow, plant in the late afternoon or evening rather than the middle of the day, and lay a thin board, some light mulch, or a piece of shade cloth over the seed row for the first few days to keep the soil temperature down while germination happens. Pull it off the moment you see sprouts. That one habit, on its own, is the difference between seeds that come up reliably and seeds that quietly fail in soil that's just too hot for them. So here's the real takeaway from all of this. Your growing season isn't ending, it's just changing shape. Every single one of these 15 vegetables proves that July isn't a dead zone, it's a second opportunity, and in a few cases, like that winter squash, it's a now or never opportunity. You don't have to plant all 15 today, just pick one. Maybe it's a row of carrots, maybe it's that squash deadline that's been sitting in the back of your mind this whole time. Just get something in the ground this week. That one small action is what turns, I guess the season's over, into, I'm harvesting fresh vegetables in October. If this helped you see your garden a little differently, let me know in the comments which of these 15 you're planting first. I read every single one, and I genuinely love seeing what everyone's growing. And if you want more practical, no-fluff gardening strategy like this, go ahead and hit subscribe, because there's a lot more growing season left than most people realize, and I'd love to help you make sure you don't miss any of it.